So it certainly feels like a new day in Arkansas thanks to the election of Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But what about violent crime? Here's what she said about the recent tragic murder of an Arkansas police officer. Let's take a listen.
Hearts broke when we learned of the tragic murder of Stuttgart Police Sergeant Daniel Scobie, who was cut down in the prime of his life by a violent repeat offender. Today, we vow that Sergeant Scobie's selfless sacrifice will not be in vain. We will end the crime wave plaguing our cities. We will end the hateful defund the police movement, and we will stand up for the heroes of law enforcement every single day. Releasing unreformed and unrepentant criminals for no reason other than a lack of space in our prisons is not compassionate. It's foolish. It's dangerous. And under my leadership, it will end.
All right, so that again was Sarah Huckabee Sanders at her inauguration speech. So obviously, it's a tragedy what happened to the Arkansas policeman. So the Arkansas legislature is now looking to address this problem of letting, you heard it, unreformed prisoners loose. And Senator Ben Gilmore is working on that legislation right now to address this problem. And he joins us. Senator Ben Gilmore, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul. It's always great to be with you. Appreciate what you do, and I appreciate that you're always pushing a strong message on what we should be doing at the Capitol, and certainly carrying a message that I certainly believe in. And so I appreciate your efforts, and it's good to be with you. Look, Sarah said it. She said it all. I mean, it's, how fortunate are we as a state to have a governor like Sarah Sanders, someone who is pushing hard, not taking no for an answer, not going to succumb to the cute arguments from the left, and we understand that we're going to fight and we have to win. And so everything that you just played in that video sums up exactly what we need to do in Arkansas and exactly what we're trying to do with this criminal justice package. Look, there's no question in anyone's minds. When you turn on the TV at night, when you read the newspaper, wherever it may be, wherever you consume your news, you hear about the crime that's affecting this state. You hear about the innocent people who are now victims thanks to repeat violent offenders. And why do we talk about repeat violent offenders? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because in Arkansas, we are far too lenient. And in Arkansas, we have a system that's broken. And the system basically is designed to let more and more people out of prison. Now, our goal is not to lock up more people. Our goal is not to lock people up and throw away the key. Our goal is to stop this crime wave of violent crime that's affecting all of our communities. And it's not just playing out in Little Rock. It's not playing out in some big city somewhere. It's playing out in our home, in our home communities. And so we have to do something about this.
Oh, I mean, absolutely, no doubt, we have to do something about it. And everybody you mentioned, I mean, everybody's noticed it. They've picked up the newspaper, or they know somebody who's been a victim by this. And so, currently, I mean, the practice of the past, the situation, I mean, it is your opinion that we are letting criminals loose, unreformed criminals, as Governor Sanders said in her address, because we just simply don't have the space to house them. We don't have prisons that are large enough. Is that one of the issues?
Yeah, well, that's certainly one of the issues. I think it actually is far worse than that. Capacity, no question, is an issue. So capacity is one issue for sure. The other issue, I don't know that we've had the will to do what we need to do to address violent crime. And what I mean by that is, in Arkansas, there's like three buckets that you, if you're a criminal, that you fall into. One of the most common buckets is what we call the 1/6 category, meaning that if you commit certain crimes, that you're eligible for parole after serving 1/6 of your sentence. Now, what does that mean? That means that there's no other criteria that you have to fall into, typically. And basically, in that instance, you are entitled to be paroled. Now, we obviously know that if you commit some heinous crime, there needs to be a strong consequence to deter from that ever happening again. We need to be able to change behaviors. And oftentimes with people, yes, you can rehabilitate, and yes, we should do that. As a person of faith that I am, I think we need to lean more on faith and getting it into our jails and prisons, and helping change people's hearts and lives so that they reform themselves through Jesus Christ, and using Scripture and the teachings in that. That's a whole other discussion that we need to have. But in the 1/6 system, you can serve basically 1/6 of your sentence before you're eligible for parole, and there's nothing at that point that anyone can do to keep you in jail longer. Now, that's assuming that, some people, yes, maybe they have reformed themselves after serving 1/6 of their sentence. Let's hope they have, but in many cases they haven't. Prime example of this, and I actually wrote an op-ed about it several months ago in the Democrat Gazette. I told a story of an inmate who was released far too early. He was sentenced to 25 years, served less than 5 years in prison. During that period of time that he was in prison, he had 40 disciplinary actions while in ADC custody. That means that he did something that caused him to get basically a demerit or a penalty. But because of this 1/6 system, there was nothing they could do. He was released. He was released back into the home community in my part of the state, in my district of Monticello. When he got back, he was in the Walmart parking lot. He struck and killed an innocent older lady who was loading groceries in her car. And when they tested his blood, he was positive for THC, and other methamphetamine and other drugs were in his system. Was that a person who was rehabilitated? Was that someone who should have been out of prison? I think not. And so we have to be tough on crime. Why? Because our law enforcement deserve it, and our citizens and taxpayers demand it. And so we have an obligation to address this problem.
Okay, so obviously, what's the support level like to address this? I mean, you've got other legislators who obviously you're going to have to pass this bill. They've got to be hearing from their constituents left and right about how violent things have gotten. I had no idea about that rule about the parole, and it sounds to me like it's mandatory, mandatory minimum sentencing, but in reverse. Where the law literally says you have to let these people go.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And so now there's a lot of qualifying factors with that, and of course I gave an example of what that's like. But the problem is the system is broken, it's convoluted. The people who are being adjudicated, so people who are criminals who have offended and are going through the system, don't understand it because it's complicated. And certainly the victims and families don't understand it because it's complicated. And quite frankly, even folks who go to college and are highly educated, like lawyers, have difficulty even understanding where their either victim or defendant is going to fall into which category. So that's far too complicated. Okay, so we need to fix that. The other thing is, there's things that we need to do to help with recidivism rates. There's programming that we need to make sure that people get. Part of making sure that we have people in prison long enough to compensate for the crimes that they've committed ensures that they're getting the programming they're needing to help change their life, whether that be drug rehab, whether that is getting a GED or getting a college degree, whatever that might look like. We need to make sure that that's available to them. And then make sure that if, in some of these cases, if they fall into the 1/6 category, they're out of prison before their programming even starts. Now, let me complicate this even more. What a lot of folks don't realize, Paul, and you may actually know this, but what a lot of folks don't know is our county jails are backlogged right now. There's almost 2,000 inmates who should be in state prison in our county jails. Now, what does that mean? That means that there's delay in adjudicating. That means that the programming that I just mentioned that we want these people to get so they can live productive lives, they're not getting because the resources aren't there. And then that means that the county sheriffs and their deputies and the folks who run the county jails, they're not equipped to handle some of these heinous, violent offenders and deal with just the issues that arise with that. And so that's creating a whole nother set of issues that we have to address. So capacity is a must. Reforming with the parole reforms that I've mentioned, and then truth in sentencing that I'll touch on here just briefly, and I've sort of already talked about it a little bit, is if you are convicted of a crime, you know exactly how much you're going to serve. And so we're sort of modeling after the federal system, as you probably know, is an 85-15, that you have to serve 85% of your sentence. And the only reason it keeps you from serving 100% of your sentence is you earn that 15%, what they call good time. So we're looking at modeling something like that, because if you're working toward getting out, and there's things that you can do and decisions that you can make and behavior changes that you can make, probably means that you're going to be far more equipped to be out of prison when you ultimately get out than someone who had to do nothing but sit in a jail cell and just wait and count the days.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Last question, Senator Ben Gilmore. Thanks so much for being with us. What about the funding mechanism of all of this? I know that may have not been exactly decided yet. I know. I mean, I haven't seen a bill yet. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so real quick, and I think to answer the second half of your last question of what's the support, what are my colleagues saying about this bill, I think that's key, because that ties into the funding component of this. And I will say there is, I think, broad consensus that we have to do something in this state to address this problem. They're hearing it from their constituents, and if they live in the central Arkansas area, they see it every day play out, right? And so they get it. And generally speaking, I think there's broad support. Thankfully, we have leader like Sarah Sanders, who is leading day one on this issue. She's not holding back. She's made it very clear where she is. I appreciate that. We've got leaders like Tim Griffin as an attorney general, who's been a leader on this day one, been talking about it. So I think we're in a really good spot. But with that is, you mentioned the money component, and it always comes down to money, right? How much money is it going to cost to do all these things? We can talk about all these wonderful things we want to do in government, but it takes money to do these things. Now, as a fiscal conservative, as someone who believes in lower taxes, has voted that way consistently, I'm proud to say that I've been consistent in trying to find ways to save taxpayer dollars and reduce the size and scope of government. That being said, we have a lot of surplus money, and it is a core function of government to ensure for public safety of our citizens. And so we're going to have to look at that. And what's it going to cost? It's probably going to be expensive, but we're going to do it without raising taxes, as we should. We're going to use a lot of one-time surplus monies to address these types of things, as we should. And we may have to get really creative. We may have to look and say the private sector needs to help us solve this problem. So let's harness that. And then, the other side of that is, to help address the acute crisis that we have at capacity, we may have to look at alternatives to house inmates, whether that be out of state or wherever that might be. We're going to have to look at everything's on the table. Everybody is in the discussion as far as the folks on the budget committee and others that are talking about it and looking at it. So that's going to have to be a real discussion we have. It's not going to be cheap. We understand that, but I think we have an obligation. And I'll leave you with this thought. Unless you have another question, but I'll leave you with this thought that what's the cost if we don't do it?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, you mentioned Central Arkansas, but up in my neck of the woods where I live in Northeast Arkansas, the crime has been unbelievable. I mean, it's just been a huge uptick. I think it's happening all over the state, and people,
sure it is.
We do have to do something. So, Senator Ben Gilmore, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, great to be with you, Paul, as always.